Welcome. I'm Leslie Canham.
I'm Mary Gavoni.
I'm Linda Harvey.
I'm Olivia Wan, and together we are the Compliance Divas.
Welcome to the Compliance Divas podcast. This is Leslie Canham, and I'm your moderator for actually one of my favorite podcasts of the year. This is a wrap-up of the podcasts that we thought were our favorite podcasts from 2024. And as we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance, we want to help you navigate regulatory compliance to keep you on track. We encourage you to subscribe to the Compliance Divas podcast through your favorite podcast channel. You can also check out our episodes on our Compliance Divas website at thecompliancedivas.com, and any resources that we mention or past episodes that we mention, you can find those on thecompliancedivas.com. Well, I'd like to just first pat us on the back as Compliance Divas for having 21,526 downloads since we first started podcasting. And for most of you who have been following along with us, we formed our podcast as at first it was just to get together as a group of 4 consultants who had clients who were asking us questions back in March of 2020 about how they can safely practice and deliver care to patients during the COVID pandemic. And as we grew as a group in giving this information to our clients and researching the information, we also found that there were other topics that people were interested in hearing about. We formed our podcast in order to provide information to our clients and audiences. And we found that when we podcast, we had the ability to put checklists and charts into the show notes of each podcast. It's become an amazing resource, not only for myself as a consultant to go back and to reach in and grab some of the resources, but also to share those resources with my clients and audiences, or whenever I have people that ask questions about specific topics. And you can access those resources as well. But I'd like to start out first with our Diva Olivia to share with us, give us just like 3 of your favorite podcasts of 2024.
Well, of course, Leslie, they're all my favorite. But if I have to think about ones that stand out in my mind, I really enjoyed the podcast on a new standard in eye safety, where we interviewed Dr. Peter Arsenault talking about how, 70% of the dentists they surveyed had eye injuries, and how there could be debris flying at 50 miles an hour. And I think that, that's one of my things I'm going to focus on for 2025 is eye safety, making sure we take the information he shared with us seriously. I also enjoyed the episode where we talked to my very own team member, Caitlin Dennison, who is a former OSHA inspector. And she shared her insights that when OSHA comes in, they're really trying to understand our process from the perspective of evaluating safety, and for us to keep in mind that, they may have just visited a steel mill and now they're coming into a dental office, and how we should be cooperative. And really enjoyed her perspective, having been an OSHA inspector and then becoming a hygienist, and now she's doing inspections again for me as a private auditor. So it was interesting to see how she made those career changes. And then I would say that I also enjoyed the episode where we talked about the keyboards and mice. And, we see that as a common violation when we do these audits, that either there's nothing protecting the keyboard at all, or they've got plastic and they can't hardly type. So I enjoyed the perspective of man and machine and what we learned from that episode. And Leslie, beyond that, I like how we have the episodes listed on the website. So if people go to thecompliancedivas.com, if they're looking for content to share for a morning huddle or a monthly team meeting or quarterly safety meeting, they could glean a lot of material that's current from our website and the listing of the episodes. And we try to keep them brief, current, and to the point. So encourage people to look at the list of episodes that we've published and tune in again and see if there's some little pearls that they could utilize in their individual practices.
That's a great reminder, Olivia, and I agree. All of those podcasts were just amazing. And Caitlin actually, when she mentioned what the most common thing is that she sees in a dental office as a violation, and she indicated that they didn't have the written plans and the hazard communication. I recently renewed my own OSHA outreach authorization. It was 3 days of class with an instructor who was formerly an OSHA inspector and inspected dental offices, and he echoed everything that Caitlin had shared on her podcast. So 100% a wonderful podcast to listen and to be preventative. Linda, how about your favorite podcast from 2024?
Leslie, I think the Divas are just amazing to me to look back and see how many podcasts that we've done over the past several years. And I know we really strive to consistently bring current relevant topics and research back information to all of our listeners without being dry. And so they get to hear from four different people and four different perspectives, but we're all aligned, going in the same direction with the best guidance and the research. So for me, there was three that popped out. One was back in May, with episode number 159, about the game changer with dealing with waterline testing. And that's when we helped the Solmetex company launch their new Fast Check 15 water test. And I remember moderating that episode and calling it a game changer because it took water testing, in-house water testing or in-office water testing, from 3 days down to 15 minutes to get a result. And I think that really frees up a practice when it comes to when you want to do the water testing. You're not tied to only certain days of the week because you're not there Friday, Saturday, or Sunday to read a test if you run at the end of the week. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And it was an easy test because everybody likened it to a COVID test where you got to pass or fail. And of course, you can continue doing some external third-party testing on an annual basis as well. Another one, Leslie, that popped out to me was episode number 149 with our another sponsor, the Hugh Freedy Group, and that was the backflow podcast. And that backflow, we were discussing with them how that occurs with the saliva ejectors. And I was really amazed when I learned the statistic that 2 out of 10 patients have backflow in their mouth. So if you see 10 patients a day, there's 2 patients right there. So it's just amazing to think how much we're actually contaminating our patients and we're not even aware of it when we tell the patients to close their lips around the saliva ejector. Depending on how that's positioned, it makes a difference. So I recommend that our listeners go back and listen to episode number 141 to get some really good information on that. And on top of that, Leslie, I remember about the same time of that podcast or either shortly afterwards, I remember seeing on a very big dental community on Facebook where someone posted that in their practice, something came up through the saliva ejector into the patient's mouth, piece of tooth or piece of calculus or something. Oh, that just is so gross, right? You can use the word gross to all of us. So it's hard to imagine that level of cross-contamination. So then my third podcast was one on HIPAA, and that was episode number 161. And that had to do with cell phones and privacy violations. Today's world, our technology is changing so quickly and everything's revolving around AI and what to hop on, what not to hop on. And so I want to just tell our listeners, we have more podcasts coming in the next year on artificial intelligence and how to manage that in your practice. So when a practice is using, when team members, let me back up, Leslie, when team members are using their personal cell phone in a dental practice, that can be HIPAA violations because now you have protected health information on your personal phone, especially when employees are using their cell phone to take images of patients and then send it over to the office and get it into the patient's chart because it takes a better picture than their camera in the office. You have to be really careful with cell phones, and particularly if you are logging into your work email or you're logging into your practice management software system on your personal cell phone, you need to have extra protections. And this is not changing as far as the ransomware and the hackers because it's getting more and more complex. Leslie, this is top of my mind because the end of October, I was able to attend in person the Office of Civil Rights security conference. And we talked about how ransomware is growing so exponentially and how AI is supercharging ransomware. And our cell phones can be a weak spot in all of that. So I think those are three varied topics, but still all very important topics. And I would love for our listeners to go back to our website, thecompliancedivas.com, and check out any podcasts that they might have missed while they're driving around town on their Christmas break or to and from work, because we have lots of great information that we can help them with, Leslie.
That's great information. And again, very hot topics and very acute pain for many of us who are worried about our data being breached or our dental practices having to be shut down due to any kind of HIPAA cyber attack. And all that went on last year, I know many of our dental practices suffered from not only the Change Healthcare issue, but also the backlash of not being able to do some of their insurance billing, not be able to collect money for insurance, and not some of my clients even had to have their offices closed where they had to rebuild their computer, all of the data again because they have been attacked and lost data, so they couldn't see patients and had to do everything by hand. So it certainly is a good preventative measure to be prepared. Now, our diva Mary Gavoni couldn't be with us today, but I think that her favorite one, at least from my recollection, was that the interview we had with Dr. John Molinari, who everyone considers to be like our favorite infection control speaker of all times, and he was giving us a little bit of an update on his view what we should be doing now that COVID is sort of at least the pandemic is in our rearview mirror. But he was talking to us a little bit about infection control with regards to the COVID surges and the other types of respiratory viruses that we have with relation to the PPE that we utilize. And while respirators were the order of business when we had been in the midst of our pandemic and we were open and seeing patients, and the best way to protect ourselves was with a appropriate NIOSH approved N95 respirator that's been fit tested. And he made a very interesting comment during that particular interview about PPE and how we gravitated to wearing more PPE. In the late 80s, when we had the HIV scare and we were just now being introduced to bloodborne pathogens being a concern, and OSHA started the bloodborne pathogen standard in 1991. And he said, now that we're wearing gloves and masks and protective eyewear, and we have a pretty good handle on HIV and medications that are working very well for people, why would we ever go back to not wearing gloves or not wearing masks or not wearing protective eyewear? And he made that very point about the respiratory viruses that circulate. Well, once we move forward to better respiratory protection, why in the world would we want to weaken our protection? Also, I think that Mary's other favorite was with Julie Varney during Dental Assistants Recognition Week. She's a very popular dental assistant that had a lot of good information for dental assistants. So that's the one that we cherish, that one celebrating. That was episode number 150, and episode with Dr. Molinari was episode number 175. Some of my favorite.
So can I chime in and also say we did a podcast, I think, with Sheree Busby, another dental assistant that I wanted to give a shout out to. I don't know the episode number, but just both of them talking about how they advanced their career in the field of dental assisting, and it was just so amazing. Julie is teaching dental assistants now. She does some speaking, but she works in that realm. And then Sheree Busby is a dental assisting trainer with Heartland Dental and Heartland Dental University. So I just want to chime in real quick and say I agree with Mary on those and add those two as a great one as well.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Sheree at the Midwinter, Chicago Midwinter. We were both there presenting programs earlier this year. And she is delightful, and she has a real passion for getting dental assistants excited about what they do. So that's a great shout out there. I also found some of my own favorite episodes I am continually sharing the podcast episodes with the team members that I train because of the wonderful checklists and the to-do list. And one of my favorites was episode number 167. It was sterilization monitoring failures, tips for successful remediation. And as most of us know, sterilization monitoring means spore testing. And I always ask when I conduct training, do you know exactly what to do in the event of a failed spore test? And do you have a checklist? Most of the time I hear just off the cuff answers, well, I guess we'd have to have it fixed. But the steps are actually in one of our podcasts. We had a great podcast with our sponsor, Hugh Freedy, where they have wonderful steps of what to do in the event of a failed spore test. And so we have a couple of episodes that address spore testing and issues with maybe a failed sterilization cycle regarding placement of what you're putting in there, how much you're putting in the sterilizer, and what kind of wrap you're using, and other issues, operator error, things like that. But this is a good one for being able to download that checklist. And so I recommend everybody go to episode number 167. We also recently did an episode on dental burrs and diamonds and rotary instruments. And we discussed everything from finishing burrs to diamonds to endo files and implant files. And we had some important questions that we brought up, such as, are they single-use disposable items, or are they approved, or they have instructions, manufacturer's instructions for reprocessing or for sterilizing? And then I thought the most interesting part of that podcast was the various different icons and pictograms, or logos, if you will, that are on these various pouches and packages of burrs. What in the heck do they mean? And so we were able to get a sort of a checklist or a chart to show what all these icons and pictograms stand for. Another question I like to ask is, do you know if your burrs are sterile? Are they delivered to you sterile, or do you have to sterilize them for use? And a lot of times I get a kind of a blank stare. Well, I never really even considered that as a response I get. So that is a very helpful podcast. Another podcast that I think that everybody would enjoy is we had one on accommodating deaf and hard of hearing patients, and I'm both deaf and hard of hearing. I use a cochlear implant, and I just wanted to share on that episode. We talked a little bit about how to make sure that we are communicating with our patients in a way that they understand, and that they repeat back to us what we heard, so that we aren't giving information to someone and they're just nodding their head because they're too embarrassed to say, I didn't catch what you said. I don't understand what you mean. And that can lead to poor patient outcomes if they don't understand the post-visit instructions or pharmaceutical instructions or any other kind of instructions that we give to them. So I think that wrapping up for 2024, we've had some great podcasts in this year. We've had some great podcasts in previous years. I know we have great podcasts of all times, and the Compliance Divas podcast it has some highly rated episodes. Our most listened to episodes turned out to be the episodes that when we were going through the pandemic, giving information about what the regulations or rather than regulations, what the interim CDC guidance was and what the interim guidance was from OSHA, and then some of the other standards like that were emergency temporary standards that people tuned into those pretty quickly. So here at the Compliance Divas, we like to bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by helping you keep on track with regulatory compliance. And we always welcome questions at support@thecompliancedivas.com. We'll hope to have you and your teams listen to these podcasts and share with your friends. I'm just amazed at how many times I go out and people come up to me and say, we love the Compliance Divas podcast. I just had that happen on Friday, where a brand new office manager is learning how to do things in the back office. And she said, I heard about your Compliance Divas podcast, and boy, does it help me understand. With that, we thank you for joining us and have a safe and productive 2025.